Hi everyone. In this video, we're going to talk about project management. We're going to discuss what it is, whether you need it, where does it fit in the development process, meaning when do you start doing project management? We're going to talk about a typical task workflow, as well as the type of software that you can use. So if that sounds interesting to you, stay tuned and let's get started. So before we begin, I want to just remind everybody watching that this whole series focuses on starting a SaaS business. So project management is a very broad category, and every company is going to have a different way to use project managers. So at a startup, project manager might be responsible for more than a project manager at a large megacorp. In this video, we're going to focus on what a project manager would do at a small company. Maybe 5 people, 10 people, maybe even 20. But if you're just starting a SaaS business and you're thinking about project management, this video is for you. So let's get started by answering what a project manager is. So a project manager is responsible for, you guessed it, managing all aspects of a project. Now it's a little different from a program manager and a product manager. And there are different varieties of a project manager. For example, a technical project manager is one such variety versus just a non-technical project manager. But all project managers will have at least one of these, will be doing at least one, definitely more than one of these 6 categories here. So let's touch on them briefly before moving on. Planning. Planning is essentially defining the scope of the project and gathering requirements, stuff like that. Risk management is essentially figuring out where things can go wrong and then creating mitigation strategies for these events. Resource management means managing resources, but not just things like tools or software licenses or laptops. Resources also means people. So once you've planned out what it is that you want to build, you're going to need to know how many people you're going to need to have working on that project. Once you have hired all those people, you got to coordinate. So on a small business project, such as a SaaS startup, you're not going to have multiple teams. You're going to have a team that's going to be working on that project. Maybe you'll have sales and marketing later, or maybe it'll be like one person initially, but team coordination isn't really necessarily required at the beginning. However, the more people you hire, you're going to want to split them up into different teams and so on. A project manager will coordinate between these teams. Now, project manager is also responsible for talking to stakeholders. Again, in a small business, there aren't really probably very many stakeholders. But if you have clients who have signed up for your software, for example, some kind of an early access, the project manager can collect feedback from stakeholders. And lastly, QA. Once your software goes to UAT, project managers are responsible for collecting feedback from UAT and turning it into stories for the team to work on. So QA isn't necessarily like part of the job description, but a project manager must ensure the quality of the application is sufficient for the customer. So all of these are part of a project manager's responsibilities, but in a small business, not all of these are going to be required. And that leads me to the next question is, do you need project management? Now, if you're a solo developer, do you need to manage a project? Now, that is entirely up to you. When I say project management, I don't mean like a person. That's a project manager, right? You may not necessarily need to hire a project manager. You may be like the founder and you may do project management. And especially if you're a solo developer, if it feels good to manage a project, by all means, go for it. If it's easier for you to kind of have a picture of what's happening and what things are done, what things are not done, go for it, right? Totally up to you. That's why I put maybe. If you have a growing team, maybe initially, if it's just like 3 or 4 people, maybe you don't need project management right away. But maybe you do. Depends, right? It depends on how you roll. If you're a remote team, maybe it's a good idea to have some project management. If you're a local team, then perhaps not necessary. But again, maybe. Now, as you start growing and you have, say 10, 15 people working for you, you're going to want to manage the project that you're working on because it's going to start to get complicated. You're going to start losing track of who's working on what, when things are due, stuff like that. So I would definitely advise to have some kind of project management as your team grows. But none of these answers is a no. You may need it, and it will depend on your individual project that you're working on. Is it complicated? If it is, you should probably manage it. If it isn't, it takes time to manage a project, so that time could be better spent implementing features. So again, depends, but that's kind of my flow chart. All right, now that we've covered what it is and do you need it, let's talk about when you want to do project management. Now, a typical flow of a project is pictured here. So we'll start at the top. Ideation. This is when you're just brainstorming, right? That's just like you're the founder. You're brainstorming the SaaS idea. Maybe you have a co-founder. You don't need to manage any project here. You have research. So you're doing market research. You're doing research on technology, whether that thing exists already, whether it's even doable, whatever it is that you're building. Then you're having a POC. So here you're not quite starting project management, but you're starting to think about, okay, if I have an idea, if it's a good idea, a doable idea, and if I can create a POC that I can submit to my investors, I'm going to need to start thinking about planning if that investor meeting goes well. So at the POC stage, I put in yellow because you don't need it just yet, but you're definitely about to need it. And planning and design, and again, I just mentioned previously, this really depends on the size of your team. But I would say like once you're in the planning and design stage and you have an idea of what it is that you're going to be building, you're going to start planning it. And if you recall, planning is part of a project manager's job. So theoretically, you are managing a project and designing. Now, in some cases, when I say design, I do actually mean UI and UX design. Some project managers will have UI UX chops and they're going to be able to create a UI for you. Some won't. So again, it depends on who it is that you're hiring, and maybe you're doing the project management yourself. So think about here, planning and design, you're going to want to, you're starting to do project management. In development, you're continuing project management, and we're going to cover this momentarily. Testing, again, continuing project management. Release, you may be thinking, well, I already released the product, so why do I need to manage the project anymore, right? Project's over. But it's not. See, once you release the software, your customers will come to you and say, hey, this isn't working quite right. Or, hey, I'd like this extra feature added that doesn't exist yet. And as you collect all this feedback from your users, you're going to need to store that feedback somewhere and then dish it out to your developers to build out the features or whatever, fix bugs. So you still need to manage that project. Support is where you have released your software and customers are using it and new customers are coming in and they're telling you, I'm willing to pay, but I'm missing a feature, or I need an import of data into the application and I need some import mechanism for that or something like that. And all of these feature requests, you're gonna be thinking, well, of course I want more customers, right? So if I just do this one thing for this customer, that's another $20 a month that I'm making. And maybe other customers are going to want the same thing. So you're continuously improving your software as you go post-launch, which means you're still managing the project. So once you've released and now you're in support mode, you continue iterating on the software and therefore still managing a project. So all things considered, at the very beginning, maybe you don't need PMing, but as soon as you start planning, it just continues and you're doing project management, whether you have hired someone to do it or whether you're doing it yourself, you're doing project management. All right, so now that you know when to do project management, what it is, and whether you even need it, let's do a quick demo. We're gonna ideate a project. This is gonna be a home management SaaS. So right off the top, what are the things that I want to be able to manage about my home? Well, first thing that comes to mind is inventory. How many batteries do I have? How much does my TV cost? Or whatever. There's a flood damage or something, right? It's inventory. Next thing I want to be able to do is projects. I want to be able to manage my projects. Some inception level business going on here. But what I mean here is maybe some landscaping, or maybe the laundry room needs to be redone, something like that. Now, next thing I may want to have is something where I can store my documents. So things like insurance papers, mortgage PDFs, whatever that I downloaded from the bank, something like that. There's more, right? Like a contractor quote tracker, stuff like that. But let's just stick to these three for the sake of this demo. Now that I have these three features defined, I'm going to go back from here. I'm going to go back to inventory. And I'm going to say, all right, for inventory, what do I need? What do I need to know? Well, I need to know what rooms are in my house, because things are in rooms, right? So I need to be able to track my rooms. Well, for rooms, maybe I need to track how many or which room is in which house. So for instance, let's say I'm a real estate investor and I may have multiple houses. So now I have house 1 and then house 2, right? So let's do that. House 1 and house 2. And in house 1, I have 2 rooms. It's a very small house. So I have the living room with a kitchen annex, and then I have the bathroom, whatever. Let's just say it's a tiny home. And then in house 2, I also have a living room and a family room, whatever, something like that. So now I'm thinking, okay, for the inventory part, I need to be able to define the house, and then for each house I need to have a room, and then inside each room there's gonna be like I have a TV in the living room, and then I don't know what else, couch, stuff like that, right? Bathroom, I have my Sonicare, and I don't know what else is valuable you want to inventory in your bathroom, but let's just say, yeah, these things in here, right? That's kind of where I'm, how I'm designing this out right here. See that using this flow chart. So now I've identified what inventory is going to need to have, at least at the very basic level, right? Then I move on to projects. Okay, so for projects, and you know what? Let's move this stuff over here so there's a bit more space. So for projects, what am I going to want to have? Well, I want to know which house the project is in, for example. So let's say I have a third house that I'm working on. Then I want to know what room it's in. Maybe it's not in a room, right? Maybe it's the front yard because I'm doing some landscaping. And I need to know whether it's a DIY project or whether I'm hiring a contractor. So if I answer that question, for DIY, I may want to have a list of things that I need, right? Like pavers or sand, stuff like that. So here I want to say like project inventory. I don't know what those things are called. I'm not a landscaper, but I do dabble in DIY. And then contractors. So how do I arrange these now? So I have a house for this house, but you know what? Contractors can be used across multiple houses. So now I have another kind of thing that I need to fit somewhere where these contractors are going to be able to be used in multiple houses, right? So I have a house here. So the project's happening in house 3 and it's happening on the front yard and I'm doing it DIY. So I need a project inventory, right? Or perhaps part of it you're hiring contractors for. Maybe they're doing the retaining wall, but then you're going to do the grass or something. I don't know, just as an example, right? So you got to fit these contractors in somewhere. I'm not really sure where, but let's just say something like that, right? So now I got the projects part done, and then I'm moving on to documents. For documents, really all I'm doing is just letting a user upload some PDFs so they have like a centralized place to store their documents. So really all I'm going to be doing here is just saying like upload files. And that's it. So now I have planned out a very rough, high level, my house management application. So I've planned out my SaaS. What's the next thing I'm going to do? We're going to create some tasks. So you might have seen this before. This is, it's called a Kanban board, but nowadays using software, you can customize your Kanban board in a multitude of ways. The most popular software called Jira allows you to create like as many columns as you want. Now, whether you should, that's a different story, but let's talk about what a typical workflow for this application might look like. In my humble opinion, the less complicated the planning process, especially for a project that is just getting off the ground with a small team, the less complicated, the better. Trust me. Oh my God, trust me. This overcomplication of projects happens everywhere. Every team I've been on, it's like 7 columns. And each column also has like subsections. So you can like drag your task here or here or here. And it's like, it's complicated. But the less complicated it is, the less people have to think about using this software, the more they can focus on actually building the SaaS that you want to build. So what does a typical workflow look like? Workflow? You got your tasks that you create. You may have an easy task. You may have a hard task, an impossible task. Each one of these tasks will take X amount of time. Maybe a day, maybe an hour, maybe a week. Usually you will use some way to estimate how long something will take. Sometimes a Fibonacci sequence, the amount you're estimating the effort. Like 1 is very low effort, 13 is a huge amount of effort, and so on. Some people will completely not do the Fibonacci, and then they'll do just like how many hours something will take. Others, and this is my favorite way to do things, will have a Kanban board that you literally take a task, you take this easy task, you drag it here, you work on it, then when you're done, you put it in here. After it's reviewed, you're done. There's no like estimating of time. There's no KPIs, nothing like that, right? These are like corporate things that you're thinking about, KPIs, right? And on a small team, you want to get your software out the door as soon as possible. You don't have like a board of directors to answer to. You don't have any of these like complicated corporate things you have to think about. You're just like, hey, I'm building software. I'm super nimble. I'm very agile. And I'm just dragging tasks from one column to another and getting them done. Now, when it comes to easy tasks, it's easy to just drag them across. Maybe something takes an hour, maybe longer. For things like impossible tasks, you may need to do some research first, right? So even if you drag it in progress, you're not actually working on it just yet, potentially. First, you're doing some research. So you're thinking, okay, well, what library I'm going to use for this? Or is this even possible? So in this case, maybe you want to have another column, or maybe you want to create another task, the task that'll just be like research for this specific story. It's up to you how you want to handle this. And trust me, you will discover with your team, you will discover what works the best for you. Because the one way that's described in some book that someone wrote 20 years ago is not the best way for your team. It's just not. Every team works differently. So you finish this impossible task and you drag it to done. And you're done. Now, throughout your development process, you're going to have some tech debt. This is things that you slap together some code to get a feature working, but it's not done in the best way you could have written it. Probably this has to do with performance or security, something like that. In which case, you're going to want to create these tech debt issues that you're going to want to come back to later. And you do want to come back to these, because if you don't, your software is going to have a bad time later. Same with testing. Usually, testing goes like this. But really, it should go like this. I know, right? It's funny, but it's true. So you do want to write some tests, and you're going to have issues that deal with tests as well. And these are going to make their way across to done column, hopefully. You don't want them over here. You want them over here. So that's what a typical workflow looks like. And I'm going to stress this again. Don't overcomplicate this process. Do not do that, because if you do this, developers will be discouraged from using it. And if they don't use it, then they will not feel accomplished and motivated, because it feels really good to take this task and drag it over here. Like, I finished something. But if they don't want to use your software, then they're never going to get that cool feeling of, I finished something, right? So again, don't make it complicated. And you, as the founder, will also feel good about looking at this and be like, wow, I got so many things I finished, right? Now, assuming you get to something like this, you're going to want to take all of these and archive them somewhere and then bring in new issues that you want to work on. And you can do this in sprints. You can do this in a Kanban way. Like, you don't need necessarily sprints. Sprints are like 2 or 3, or well, 1, 2, or 3 week kind of spans of time where you sign up to do something. But again, on a small team, you don't need those. You don't need those. Just because it says in the book that you should use sprints, figure out whether it works for your team first, right? Don't just apply something from a book because it's in a book. This goes for more than just project management, by the way. All right, typical workflow, done. Last thing I want to talk about is software you can use. So let's cover that. Software. We already talked about Jira, right? So everybody, everywhere you go, every corporation is going to have some kind of project management software. Now, if you're striking out on your own and it's just you and you're hosting your code in GitHub, they have something called GitHub Projects. It's free. You can host your code. You can deploy your code, which we talked about in a previous video. And you can also manage that project there. It's very rudimentary, right? Like GitHub Projects compared to Jira, it's not even a comparison. GitHub Projects is very rudimentary, but if you're just starting out, and I just talked about this, don't make it complicated. In GitHub Projects, it's not complicated. You got your columns. You can add some extra columns if you want. You got your issues. You can assign them to people and you just drag them from one column to another until you're done. And it works. But there are some other options. Plain. Specifically, I think the URL is plain.so. Also really kind of cool software. They're open source, so you can actually download and self-host Plain if you want. Jira Online has a free plan that you can use, but it's limited, but it's there. Notion, again, Notion, I think you would eventually have to pay if you want to have multiple people using the same Notion database, but you can get started with Notion as well. And they do have a kind of a Kanban view that you can use. The nice thing about Notion also is the user experience is very good, and you can use it for planning as well. There are also Azure DevOps. So if you're using Azure DevOps for deployment and code storage, maybe you're a Microsoft shop and you're just generally using Azure DevOps, they also have a Kanban style board that you can use there. And the OG Basecamp. So Basecamp is still pretty good. And honestly, there are many other options. These are just 6 that I've listed. All of these I have used, but there are others. Monday.com, I'm sure you've heard advertising. Asana, ClickUp, and Linear. It's kind of a new kid on the block. Also pretty good if you look at their website. So lots of options. But if I were you, and if I was hosting in GitHub, I would recommend starting with GitHub Projects. All right, that is it, guys. So we've covered everything from software, a typical workflow for project management. We've planned out live a home management application. We've talked about when you want to do project management, if you even need it, and what it is. So thanks for watching. Thanks for watching the whole series, if you've seen all the way up to this video. And I may have a bonus video coming. We'll see. Also in this playlist. So stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.